Well, hello and welcome to episode 133 of Retro Power Uncut, and you find me here in a new strange space. The business has grown quite a lot over the years since we started in 2009, but there's been quite an acceleration in that rate of growth of business subsequent to COVID really, and following on from the back of that, and then particularly in the last sort of 2 years, things have accelerated very rapidly, and we've taken on quite a lot of people, and I think I'll be corrected on these numbers, but I think since we started doing the uncut episodes, since Jamie started filming those, I think we've gone from around 12 people, I think, to now 21 of us. So there's things have grown a lot, and we need more space. And one of the things that has been raised was the fact that we don't really have anywhere for people to congregate to have a brew and something to eat at lunchtime together. You know, everybody's in their own little spaces around the business, in their own little areas, and there's not really a sort of collective space. And we actually haven't physically got room in the building to have a collective space. Every inch is kind of needed for building cars. So we had a bit of a head scratch and thought actually it might be quite a good idea to get a mobile canteen type unit and put it in the yard outside. So we have, and I'm in it now. Over the last couple of weeks I've been trying to source one and managed to find a decent one. We got it from a guy, a company called Conarken Limited in Chesterfield with Clay Cross. They were extremely helpful, really good guy, which made a change because most of these seem to be being sold, in inverted commas, by scam artists and general criminals. So it was very nice to find somebody that was actually a decent guy, and it's a really, really decent space. Not very exciting, I understand, at the moment, because we haven't got any tables or chairs or posters or anything in here, but this has only been here for 3 days, 2 days in fact, 2 full days. So it's a work in progress, but it got a bit of a clean yesterday. It now has power, it now has water, we have a working fridge, and hopefully in another week's time we might have some tables and chairs and making it look a bit more homely in here, and people will be able to come in here and have their lunch. So yeah, that's where we're starting the little tour. There's another little bit of the empire is now outside in the yard. So on that note, we'll move through into the fabrication shop and catch up with where some actual work's been happening. So we'll see you in there in a moment. So you find me through in the fabrication shop, where we are in front of a peeled DC2 Integra, and you will recall from previous episode that we were in the process of stripping down the body shell and getting rid of the bits, the extraneous parts that we didn't need, which has been accomplished, and we've got rid of most of the parts we don't need. We've been coming up with a bit of a plan for the exact structure around the sill area on this body, on this floor pan. George has been doing some work on using the scan data in CAD, which you'll have seen on the previous episode. And I've had a bit of toing and froing in exactly how to go about dealing with the sill structure, because I was hoping to use more of the Allegro inner and outer sill structure, because it simplified partly the alignment of the Allegro body to the Integra floor pan. However, there were a couple of complications with doing that, not least of which is me wanting to put a bit of structure more or less where the outer sill lies on the Allegro. Now we're modifying the outer sills anyway. The modification was originally going to be a trim piece, because there's going to be a widening of the sill. However, the current plan, as it stands now, is that we're actually going to make that a structural part and make the modification to the outer sill in the metal rather than in carbon fibre, and have that as a significant piece of the sill structure, so that we can save space on the inside of the sill, where we've not got a great shortage of space, but it just makes more sense in that we'll then be able to keep more of the Honda. So there's been a little bit of background work going on there. And the other key bit of background work is that we've cut it in half and shortened it. So to elaborate slightly on that, Scott has fabricated some stays that connect the rear beam on the select jig to the next beam forward, both of which you'll recall from previous episode were fixtured to the body shell, or to the floor pan, body shell as it was at the time. So those two have been connected together by two braces, two diagonal braces, so that nothing can move. And then he's put some stops on those. He's tack welded some stops using in 25mm box section to the sides, to the select beams, so that the beams can't move laterally on this select jig. They can only move fore and aft. And because they're tied together by the two diagonal braces, the whole lot acts as one single piece moving on the jig. We've then taken out the alignment bolts from the select jig. That lot's free to slide. We've then carefully decided, you have to pardon these slightly flappy bits down here, but we've then carefully decided exactly where to section the floor pan, which we've done with quite a degree of sort of judgment, as you'd expect, to make sure that we don't jeopardise A, the strength anywhere, but B, make it so that it's not really detectable afterwards, because we want it to be neat and look like it should have been like that. So we've divided the tunnel structure, which is a substructure which also has the two inner chassis rails. We've divided that sort of roughly here. There's 130mm been removed from it. We've divided that there, and that's the joint where the line where that has been rejoined, because that's a section where the rails and the tunnel all run parallel, and there'll be no outward evidence afterwards that anything's been changed there. And this section has got to be shortened and refixed. And over here, I'll pick them up and bring them over, we have the original seat mounts, which will be going back in on the original distance from the forward seat mounting, so that the original seats will still fit, but obviously they'll be slightly moved relative to this rail, because that's where we've shortened things. We've then split the floor pan in the place where the profiles of the sections fore and aft of the split line lent themselves best to being rejoined, and we've put a step in that joint so that we could keep the profile neat this side. Basically, we've just divided that in the most logical place to make it the neatest final answer when everything's joined back together. Then Scott's now slogging through the rot repair on the Integra. It's not too bad, but he's removed quite a lot of structure from the rear inner sill on the offside, and the rear suspension mountings on the offside, because there was quite significant corrosion in that area. So he's cut all that out, refabricated that, and he's now done the inner structure. He's now working onto what was the inner sill section, which is now kind of the outermost part of the car as it sits there now. So Scott's working on that. We've actually managed to recover that. He's drilled that out, drilled all the welds out of it, taken it off to repair the inner structure, and now he's going to be putting that piece back in place and replug welding it all back in place and piecing it all back together. So he's getting pretty well on with the rot repair that side. Then he's got a bit to do this side. This side's actually a lot less bad, so there's a lot less rot repair to do this side. But next week we should have rot repair done, floor panel back together, seat mounts back in, tunnel all back together. So basically we should have a good basis then to do the next jobs, which are really tidying up the wheel arches, although they're pretty much done now, removing the very rear section of the floor to a line which we can put on using our scan data and CAD. And obviously the front's already been removed, the reinforcements have been removed from that, so again we can put the cut lines in on the front and we can section that off, and at that point then we can turn our focus over to the Allegro, where we've got to remove a lot of extraneous structure, i.e. most of it, from that body shell to enable that to be fitted over this. And to that end, I was pondering, because we're removing the lower part of the sill structure on the Allegro, my original plan was to mount the outer body shell. It's a system I've used before, mount the body shell on sill clamps on this jig while the Integra is on the fixtures, and it means that the two are both mounted to the select jig, but both adjustable independently of each other. Basically, the sill clamps can be adjusted, the fixtures can't, so I can move the body shell, I can twist it, I can get it all dead straight and aligned with it in place on the jig, and then attach the two together. However, I can't do that if I haven't got sills to attach the sill clamps to. So at that point, Bobby kindly suggested that he had quite a large A-frame crane in his storage container, and that we could borrow that. So he's brought that in, and we're going to use the A-frame crane to support the Allegro shell over the top of here, and then do our sort of fine alignment over this. Then we'll tag it all in place, work out all the structure, and then fix it that way. So watch this space on that. You'll see it will develop. So yeah, nice steady progress on this, moving forward in all the right directions, and everything's going as expected. And moving on from that, Bobby's working on the CV8, and he's been busy doing basically some of this is what we would term dry build. Quite a lot of it's what we would term dry build. Lots and lots of fiddly bits. So one bit that's standing out in my eye is that the power assisted steering reservoir for the power steering fluid. He's got that mounted up, fixed in place, and worked out the line routings on that. He's got the wiper motor. We've elected to stick with the Lucas wiper rack and cable system. It has its downsides, but actually they're pretty effective. They do the job. They're easy to mount. They're easy to get into a limited space because you can put the motor remotely where you know you do have space. And having been around the house a little bit, we decided actually the original mounting position for the motor had a lot going for it really, so that's where the motor's now going. So that's mocked up using an old rack but a new motor in place, because the old motors are slightly different to the new Lucas one, so we've used a new one because the mountings are slightly different. That's all in place. He's now got the HVAC unit back in. Long-term viewers will remember, because it was a long time back now, when I refabricated all of the bulkhead structure in this car, we fabricated it all to be a transverse air box, which is the air feed for the heater mechanism. It kind of was the air feed on the original heater mechanism, but it was a much more complicated, messy system originally. On this one, that's just an air box that feeds air into sort of a trumpet that feeds air into the HVAC system. That's now in place. Bobby's got the HVAC mocked up in there, and he's working out the, because we knew we had space for them, but we didn't go into any of the detail on them. He's planning and making the sections for the water feed lines for the heater unit, for the heater matrix, and the refrigerant lines for the air conditioner. And you can see it, there's a 4-port, I've forgotten who makes them now, Vintage Air I think, the 4-port bulkhead connector, which goes through the bulkhead just above the steering column. That there's a cavity formed through the air manifold bulkhead there, so that so it's still sealed to the air, but allows those bulkhead unions to go through. There's sort of a deep recess inside to allow for those. Another little job in that area that he's got on with, which was sort of on the back burner and a known problem area that had been playing on my mind a bit, was when we modified the bulkhead for the pedal box arrangement and for the revised steering column and for various other things that were done in the driver's footwell. One of the problems I had was that the side of the bulkhead was extremely close. The pedal box support part of the bulkhead was extremely close to the UJs, the upper UJs on the steering column downlink. And the bolt heads were going to catch the bulkhead there, and it was a bit of a problem. And I couldn't really see a very simple solution short of machining the UJs, but I was a bit concerned that we would have to machine too much of the UJ away. Bobby's confirmed that we would have to machine too much of the UJ away. He's come up with a very lateral thinking solution, which is to move the flange upwards and loop it up and over the UJ there. The bolt flange for the pedal box, he's just moved that section of the bulkhead up to enable the bolt to go into a sort of a recess under that flange. It was a really neat solution. I hadn't thought of that, and it's a really good way of solving the problem. So thumbs up on that one, that's great. He's also been on with starting on the plumbing layout for the, related to the HVAC system on the front end, the air conditioning condenser, getting the pipe work run to that, working out where that's going to go and getting the mounting points in place for that. And then he'll be doing the same for the heater pipe work and getting all that run to the heater bypass connector that goes onto the engine block, getting all that in place, getting it mounted, getting places to locate it all. And he's also made, on those with any knowledge on CV8s will know, there are 2 diagonal braces that go from the footwells on the front of the car down to the front cross member. Now that was already different on this car because this car has a Series 3 Interceptor front cross member fitted. And so they'd already been changed, but we had another little revision in that we had a clash between the steering column location and the diagonals to the front cross member. So Bobby's done some reinforcers into the front bulkhead and remade the diagonal braces. They're fairly extraneous, the braces. They don't really achieve that much because the chassis tube's a 4-inch tube. I'm sure they're 1/8 inch wall, 4-inch tube. They're pretty bloody sturdy tubes, so they're not really going to go anywhere anyway. But though Bobby's puts the braces in again, just so it's as per the original, and that we've got that extra bit of bracing in there just for peace of mind. And there's some more braces got to go in on the front between the front suspension towers and this this cross member that Bobby's made that carries the cooler pack and the air intake pipe work and all that. So he's got that to deal with as well. I think that pretty much covers, there's a few other bits of plumbing going on in the background, but that pretty much covers where we're at on the CV8 front. in terms of Project Kuma, the next step I can see, because of all the things lying on the floor, is that the running gear that has just been removed from the Project 1 Mark 1 Escort, that we'll see in a minute, is lying here awaiting Sam's return so that he can bolt it all into this Project Kuma Mark 1 Escort, so we can get all of this car rolling. And then in parallel with that, over there, I'm not going to walk back over there again, but over on the bench where you've seen Tom hitting wheel arches a lot before, Tom's carried on hitting wheel arches. He's now made all of the sections for the wheel arches in terms of the main shaping, but he's now doing the what we call setting, which is basically dressing them with a hammer and a slapper or a spoon to just very, very lightly stretch the surface. So instead of rocking anywhere on the former, they then sit comfortably onto the former, basically making them sit with no rock, with no gap but no rock onto the former, getting them to all be set like that to the epoxy tooling formers. Once they're all sitting properly on the formers, then he'll scribe them out, cut them, TIG weld them together, then replenish them again onto their formers, and at that point they'll all be ready to go onto the car. So that process is going to be going on. There's more than 2 weeks work still left there by the time he's got all of those set and then getting them grafted into the car. There's still a chunk of work to do there. In terms of the dry build work, we're pretty much there on this. There's a few bits still to do around the engine bay, and then obviously the running gear's got to go in, got to finalise things on that. I think last time you saw us, Sam was doing some revisions to the exhaust system. I don't know if we've actually covered that or not. We hadn't covered that. Yeah, Jamie's not sure either. I lose track. We've done some work on the exhaust system. There are a couple of areas where it was too tight. Both the exhaust systems were not perfect to the body shells. The first one wasn't quite right, and then both of them were made from the same car, and there's slight variations car to car, only very slight. They're a little bit tight in a couple of spots under the floor pans. So Sam's done a bit of revision work, done some cuts and re-welds in various sections on the exhaust and got them to fit better. And then, yeah, that's pretty much where we're at with Kuma. We're basically going to get it rolling, and then we're awaiting the wheel arches for the final stages of dry build. And in the background, I don't know if Cal's going to elaborate on that this time, but in the background, Adam and Cal will be going through collating the final list of all fasteners required, all processes required for surface treatments on things, all of the things that need to be got in place prior to the final build of the cars, because Project 1, that we'll see in a second, is rapidly heading towards that sort of stage. I'm going to point into the paint booth. I'm sure Jamie will have some nice footage, but lurking in the paint booth, we have the Orange Ascona that we saw not last week, but the week before, in for repair. That's now done, and I believe is ready for, that's ready to go back. And Mark's nodding at me from through the door. That's ready to go back to its owner, so he'll be very happy to have that back again. Very pleased and very relieved, I imagine, to have that back. And then moving into here, we've got Mark, and I think Steve, I can just see Steve's head bobbing around over there. These chaps have been very busily doing all of the fine detail work on the polyester, on the Project 1 Mark 1 Escort. The front wings have now been welded on. A bit of trauma, toing and froing, which we've mentioned before in terms of getting those on because we had some issues. But they're now on, that's all been done, everything's welded, everything's fixed in place. The final fine tuning of the wing to door has been done. There's a recoating of polyester gone in, and then the final blocking work's been done. There's been some fine tuning of swage lines, fine tuning of blends between the arches and the body. A lot of fine tuning work basically. A lot of the guys have been turning the lights off, shadowing down the side of the car with a light so that we can see that the swage lines are all true. Trying to just sort of try and play light on everything from different angles just to make sure that all the lines are correct. Because it's amazing how a very, very small amount of block sanding near a swage line can make an enormous difference to the appearance of the swage line. So it's very, very fine detail work. It's one brush with a sanding block can make an enormous difference to the look of a swage line and make it look like it deviates. So there's a lot of fine detail work done on there, because grafting the arches in, while the standard of metal work of the arches is very good, it's very, very hard to get the swage lines exactly true where they run in and out of those wheel arches. And we are relying on the polyester coating to be able to true up those swage lines slightly. and it is quite a fine job as Mark's doing now. Bits like that where there's a little bit of filler in above that wheel arch, just get that blend exactly right and exactly matching the other side. And you can look at it 10 times and it looks different every time you look at it, and you start to question your sanity after you've done it for a while. It really is quite tricky, but it's getting very, very close now. Steve's been working on the other side, got that really good. Mark's pretty much there with this side. I heard epoxy primer mentioned, so I'm not going to get carried away and say watch this space for next week, because something will come and kick me if I say that, but I've heard mention of primer. We'll see where we're at next week. They've still got to do the roof. I think the roof was pretty good though, dare I say it. The roof's good, yeah.
Didn't really need the next coat of polyester.
No, so block most of it off, yeah. So lots of blocking on the roof, block most of that back off really, but it was just a sort of a safety coat. When we put polyester on some of the car, it kind of makes sense to put it all over, just not go on too heavy all over, so we don't lose too much detail. But yeah, most of the roof can just be blocked back, and we can lose a lot of the thickness of that coating there, because the roof's it was a new panel, it fitted pretty well. There were a few wiggles and woggles around the edges. There were some adjustments done on the screen apertures which rippled the edges, the very edges very slightly, but nothing too drastic. A little bit of pulling down above the gutters, obviously where the spot welds were done there, you get a few little ripples along there that need taking out, a few imperfections to take out, but it's getting pretty close. And then there's been quite a lot of work on the front end as well, just getting everything to be true around the grille, getting all the alignment to look right on the front, and finessing all the seams and panel joints at the front. So it's coming together. It's very, very close to the final stages now. So paint isn't beyond the horizon now. We're getting pretty close. I think that pretty much rounds up where we are, because I've gone on for an awfully long time. So at that point, I will hand over to Cal in the assembly workshop to see where we're up to, what we're up to in there.
Okay, thank you, Nat. I've got myself my trusty round stone coffee, and I'm going to have a wander out here. As Nat's probably already said, there's quite a lot going on at the minute. It seems quite hectic, and the coming and going of cars has continued a little bit. In terms of a new arrival over there, which we'll cover in a minute. What I think we'll start with is Camaro and E-Type. So, Camaro, the Keystone has arrived, which is the radiator. As you'll know, over the previous few weeks, we've been working on the design for the radiator, which incorporates the power steering reservoir as well. Also has mounts for the oil cooler, which cools the power steering and brake boosting hydraulic circuit, and the AC condenser. And that arrived this week, so that was Concept Racing. They've done their usual absolutely top-notch job. And that kind of then allows us to get a load of things together now. So once we've got that in, we've actually moved the car over here to the ramp because it goes in from underneath. Once we've got that in, we can finish the coolant plumbing, we can get that air intake pipe that we showed being made previously done. We can get the hydraulic connections finished off, we can get the AC plumbing finished off, and actually it pretty much leads to buttoning up everything in the engine bay. So it's a proper Keystone job, and the one thing we've got left to do on it is the fill caps. What we decided to do, because the position of them is very difficult to demonstrate the exact position and angle of the fill things. It's very difficult to demonstrate in a drawing or even with a mock-up one to get it absolutely perfect. And it's such a big feature of this engine bay, the two matching caps for the power steering and coolant, that we decided we'd get Concept to fabricate the radiator without those on, so we could get it absolutely bolted in, 100% certain of its position, and then actually make up the necks and tack them in situ with them in the holes to be 100% sure they were dead concentric and exactly as we want them. So that's going to be our next job, is actually welding those necks on, and that will finish the radiator, and then we can carry on with all the jobs we've been talking about. So very, very excited to see that progress now. E-Type, you will notice quite obviously the engine is now out. We mentioned previously that we knew that was going to have to come back out straight away after we'd fitted it, because the gearbox conversion that we had, despite being generally advised it would be a straight fit, is not. It's too tight on the tunnel. Not ridiculously tight, but tight enough we wanted to make some tweaks to it. So we've now dropped that back out, and the reason we were waiting to drop that out was that we wanted to do everything else we wanted to assemble everything else that was on the engine before we dropped it out to make sure there was no chance there was something we discovered later required the engine to come out again. So we've done all of the ancillary component fit up on the engine to make sure everything was fine. And the bit we were waiting for was the exhaust manifold. That was the final piece. We wanted to just try 100%. And that was the exhaust manifold and system was made by Classic Fabs, who have done an absolutely amazing job of it, I have to say. Proper art piece. And that, not surprisingly, all fitted perfectly. So that was the last piece. Then we took everything back off the engine again. We've dropped it out. While it was in there, we marked out the various bits we wanted to edit on the gearbox. So there were various bits of casting. It's a Tremec T5 gearbox. So they're, I think, more commonly probably found in something like a 5-speed Mustang maybe. I'll be corrected on that, I'm sure, but it's a newly available gearbox that wouldn't normally be a Jaguar fitment. And there were various bits of casting on the housing, so we've trimmed some bits of casting off that were tight on the tunnel, which were unnecessary. Modified the adapter plate slightly just to notch out the corner there where it was tight on the tunnel, and then we've just done a little bit of work on the corner of the tunnel on this top section here, which was a bit of a disappointment because we go to great lengths generally with our custom builds to make sure everything fits perfectly before paint, but of course we'd assumed stupidly on this one that this off-the-shelf conversion would be a straight fit, but needed a little bit of tweaking, but wasn't anything that really damaged the paint. We just moved a flange slightly further around on there, so all good. And I think with that done, we are now ready to put this all back in for what will hopefully be the final time. So we'll get that lot back in. One of the other things we did on it before pulling it out was the coil pack bracket. So we're running this on ECU Master ECU, so we're going to use the new ECU Master Pro Series ECU on it. It will be running individual throttle body injection, it will be running lambda sensors, NOx sensors. It will be still a coil pack doing wasted spark ignition. We couldn't really do coil on plug and still make it look pretty on this engine without it ruining the kind of vintage look of the engine. So we're running a coil pack mounted down at the side, and we were doing the bracketry for that. So James machined up some really nice billet clamps that clamp around this chassis tube here and mount the coil pack on the inside of here, so it's hidden away under the throttle body. It's still easy to access to take it off for servicing, but reasonably hidden visually. So they've been done. And another thing we were looking at was wanting to put some NOx sensors on the engine, and the block, as you can probably see, that it's completely blank on the sides. There's nothing really there in terms of bosses on the casting to mount NOx sensors to. So what we've decided to do is pull these core plugs, effectively they're threaded plugs in the top here in the head, and we're going to take those out and actually machine our own that have a bolt position to attach some NOx sensors on there. So we'll probably put one at the front, one at the back to run twin NOx control on there. So that's in progress. Otherwise on this, various jobs that having the chrome back allowed. So Adam's been building up the chrome door frames with the rubber channel seals that go in there. He started mocking up some of the chrome trim on the side, so you can see the rivets that have been fitted where the chrome attaches to the side there. Starting to basically mock up bits of chrome, make sure everything's ready to fit and make provision with the rivets, etc. I noticed actually looking at the back there, another job, the electric aerial. They were actually, I believe, a factory fitment on this, an aerial in that position, because I asked the owner when the metalwork was being done whether he wanted to leave that hole in there or delete it, and he opted to leave it. So we've gone with the original equipment type electric aerial that's going in there. So yeah, progressing well. Really excited to get the engine back in. Let's have a little wander down here past those beautiful manifolds and to the Land Cruiser, which has really come on a lot. We're talking about the sort of keystone being the radiator on the Camaro. Well, the inlet manifold and fuel rails were kind of the keystone on this. So we've now got them back from anodizing, so that very quickly allowed a lot of progress. So we've assembled the two halves of the manifold with their O-ring that joins the two halves, that machined in two halves because that's the only way you could machine it as a billet machined part. That's then been fitted, fuel rails bolted on. John's then made up the various fuel pipes that still needed to be done. So there's the one that links the two rails, one from the back of the rail to the fuel pressure regulator, and then the other one from the other rail down to a bulkhead fitting underneath, which is the feed up from the tank, from the pump, And then we've also fitted the cam covers, so we did 2 machined cam covers which replaced the original cam cover completely. We've got baffle plates inside to stop oil getting chucked out of the breather, and then on the top of them they've got a mounting provision for Denso coil on plug units, so this, unlike the Jag, is running coil on plug. And then we've done mounting points for all the wiring for both the injector wires and the coil wires. We've done little sculpted out sections in the side so that the injector wires could come over and straight down to the injectors they go on. And then we'd also plan the wire routing to run through these to items that are on the front of the engine, so the cam sensor, crank sensor, all the oil sensors. I think this side, the alternator connection, so those wires go in at the back, clipped inside the cover, and then the wire just comes out of the front and down, so it just allows us to get the wiring to the front components on the engine without trailing through awkward spaces or visibly on the outside of the engine. And then obviously the final part, those machine covers that say Retro Power on, go over the top and hide all that away. And then obviously we've got the throttle body on there. So yeah, looking really good. We also got the oil fill neck back from anodizing, the cap that we'd made for that. Also did a matching handle for the dipstick, which is came back from anodizing, so we fitted that, and we've got the cam belt covers all on there now. So that was all leading up to being able to test the fuel system. So with the rails on there and the plumbing done, we stuck some fuel in the tanks, and because they're eventually hidden away under the seat base panel work, we wanted to test everything worked there, obviously pressurise it and leak check it, but also test the Venturi pump system. So on this we've got twin tanks, one each side. There's a high pressure pump submersed in one of the 2 tanks, which is the one that you fill from externally, and then there's a link pipe between the 2. So when you fill them, when the first tank gets up to a certain level, it starts to fill the second tank until they're both full. But obviously when you start using the fuel from one tank, once it gets below the link pipe, you would have a load of fuel in the secondary tank that wouldn't be used. So we've got a Venturi pump in there, which basically uses the flow of the return fuel going back to the main tank to create a Venturi effect, which sucks the fuel out of the secondary tank and basically keeps the main tank topped. It's a system that's sort of integrated into a lot of saddle tank cars like Imprezas and that sort of thing, where you've got a tank that goes over the prop and has 2 low points. So we wanted to test that as well, which we did. We actually just got a paint mixing cup with a little bit of fuel in it so we could see the quantity in there, submersed the pickup pipe in that, ran the fuel for a while and we could see it going down, so that was working as it should. So that's all been refitted. Everything's good, no leaks, Venturi pump's working, so we can get all those covers and get the seat bases back in. So that's kind of that domino effect. We'll get the seat covers in, get the seat runners in, get the seats in, and that's pretty much the interior buttoned up at that point. And I think we are going to be very, very quickly up to a point where we can do first fire up. John's just got to wire in the oil sensors. When we did the engine management loom, we were able to size up almost everything, but the exact position of the oil pressure sensors and oil temperature sensors hadn't quite been finalised, so we left those wires a little bit long, so we're just going to cut them to the right size, terminate those, and that's basically ready for Dave Rowe, who's going to come over and do the initial Motec programming for first fire up. So we'll be nervous on that day, but hopefully all will go well. I'm going to stay here for the minute. Morris, James was working on a few things, just buttoning up the boot. The trim panels went away to Dean, I think last week it was, to do the leather work on those, and he's also doing a leather pad to go on the inside of here as well. And then sort of tied in with all of that, James was making a bracket for a mica switch which goes on one of the boot hinges to turn a boot light on when the boot's open, do the wiring to the light itself, finish off the wiring that goes into the boot lid for the number plate light, and just generally button up all the remaining bits of wiring and work in the boot there. So Dean's actually cracked on really fast with that. The trim panels for there, they're done, will be dropped off with me this week. So we should be able to button that up actually. I feel like I've used button up a lot this episode. We'll be able to get all those trim panels in. He's done the carpet as well, so carpet will be in, that'll finish off the boot. Yeah, finish that job off. And last but not least, I mentioned earlier an arrival, so what I might do is get Jamie to carefully follow me around without falling down the pit. So this, which is a car we finished, I'm trying to think how long ago we finished it. It feels like about 2 weeks ago, but in retro power time, that's probably about 2 years ago. And yeah, the owner's had it back. I think he's only done one event. He did a show in it with a track day at Goodwood, had loads of fun on the track. I think he did get best in show trophy, but it threw a fault on it's got an electric water pump. So on this, we've got the radiator in the front, radiator pipework goes through some really neat sort of housings in the car, and then there's an electric water pump which is hidden under some panel work in the back, what would be the back seat area. And then it's got a little controller unit behind the dash with a display that tells you the temperature, tells you the status of the electric water pump and the fans. And it was throwing a sensor short circuit warning. Now it's not a big problem from using the car at the time, because the fail-safe mode is it just puts the fans and the water pump on full blast, so the only danger is it runs a little bit cold. However, obviously it wanted sorting, and we actually managed to identify it surprisingly quickly for a wiring gremlin. Thought it might be a sensor failure for a start, so we'd swapped the sensor, but it still threw the warning. Now we unplugged the sensor and it then threw an open circuit warning. But what we did notice is whilst we had the sensor disconnected and it was throwing an open circuit, we also saw it throw the short circuit again, which pretty much meant it's got to be something to do with the wiring or the controller itself. We knew we'd done a extension on the wiring to the sensor. It was some wires that were running the main wiring loom. But then we wanted to get the routing exactly how we wanted it. In the end, we ended up extending the sensor wires by probably 300mm, and there was a joint in there. And I said there was a soldered joint. And every now and then, people who've done soldering will know this. You sometimes get, as you remove the soldering iron, a little spike off the side of the solder. And I said, I wonder if we've ended up with that, and it's gone through the heat shrink and actually poked into the other wire. Now, so Adam unheat shrunk the wire. And actually, it wasn't that. It was that 2 strands of copper from the wire had somehow exited the side of the heat shrink and stabbed through the heat shrink. There was literally 2 strands sticking out and exactly matching 2 holes in the heat shrink on the other wire to the sensor. So unusually with wiring gremlins, we found it very quickly, and it was just a case of snipping those 2 stray strands and re-insulating it. So that's now sorted, and at the same time we've done a service, so we've done an oil change on it, just given it a spanner check all throughout. When we do all the spanner checking originally, everything's paint marked, so it's reasonably easy to go through and just visually identify whether any nuts and bolts have moved, and that all looked good. So yeah, that's ready to go back. So another quick in and out job. And then last week we also had Kaiser 1 here, the W108 Mercedes, which had an issue with the nav screen. Funnily enough, a wiring issue again. The nav screen had died on it, and it was the visual cable that connects the screen to the main controller on the Alpine Freestyle audio nav systems, which did mean disassembling a lot of the interior to replace the cable, but it all went reasonably smoothly. Took everything out, replaced the cable, got it all back in. Yeah, and that car's on its way again. So that's it really for this week. I think we shall see some cars leaving us over the coming weeks. The Mustang, I know, is imminently going to go. We've been kind of holding fire a little bit on it because the owner's actually having a garage built, and it sort of made sense for us to freewheel a little bit at the very end rather than him having to pay for it to be stored somewhere else while his garage was being built. So we've just got one remaining job to do on that, and then that'll be ready to go. And I think I need to give him a shout, but I'm pretty sure his garage is about finished, so we'll be able to get that back over to him, and he can have that for the summer. On that note, I think I'm going to leave it for this week, and we shall catch up again next week and see where we're at with everything. Have a great weekend.